1983 is the height of the Cold War between the two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. There have been a number of times throughout the decades in which it spanned, where the world nearly entered into a Third World War. This video will look at one of those times, where a fully loaded Boeing 747 belonging to Korean Airlines was shot down by a Soviet fighter plane. The Russians insisted the plane was flying in restricted airspace, and it was. The Korean pilots had no idea, but their plane had been flying off course into and over Soviet territory. So why would the Soviets shoot down a civilian airliner? A very serious act of aggression which could have easily led to war. Just after midnight on the 1st of September 1983, Korean Airlines Flight 007 takes off from New York's Kennedy Airport on a long overnight flight to Seoul's Gimpo Airport in South Korea. There are a total of 269 passengers on board, 246 passengers and 23 crew members. Most passengers are Asians, Koreans, Japanese, Filipinos and Taiwanese, who will be taking connecting flights after landing in Seoul. During the Cold War, planes flying to Asia could not fly over the Soviet Union because of their strict no-fly zone. On a flight from New York to Seoul, this would have been the fastest and most efficient route, so instead planes had to make a stop in Anchorage, Alaska to refuel and continue to Asia. Once landing in Anchorage for the stopover, the pilots Captain Chung Byung-ing, First Officer Son Dong-hui and Flight Engineer Kim Wee-dong will plan a new flight plan for the leg to Seoul. They punch in the new route into their flight computer. The computer is called INS, or Inertial Navigation System. It's a system where a pilot can manually enter up to 10 coordinates for the plane to fly to and fly along on its own. These days the INS is ancient technology and is very rarely used. By the year 2000, most major airlines had upgraded their planes to use a more sophisticated and more precise navigation instrument, the Flight Management Computer, or FMC. Tonight the crew will be following the R-20 Airway. Airways are sort of like highways in the sky, designated air corridors designed for civilian airplanes. Along this route are waypoints, checkpoints they are like. They are usually 5-letter words such as Nabi, Nux, Niva, Nino, Nipi, Nitim, and Noka. The crew will have to let air traffic control know when they pass over each of them, because the controllers won't be able to know where they are, as their radar can only go so far out over the ocean. The Boeing 747-200 lifts off into the night sky once again to complete its journey. Shortly after takeoff, the crew must fly a specific compass heading before turning on the INS. Once the crew are ready, the autopilot switch will be turned to the INS position, and the plane will fly along the flight path dictated by the pilots. But that didn't happen. Rather, the plane stayed on the one magnetic heading the crew were given in Anchorage, and slowly overnight drifted more and more off course. It is unknown whether the pilots simply just didn't flip the switch, or if the plane just didn't respond when they did. The flight recorder shows the INS wasn't turned on, so it could be either. Throughout the flight, the plane just kept drifting north of their assigned route before being picked up by a Soviet radar station. This isn't too out of the ordinary, as there were other US military planes nearby over the Bering Sea monitoring Soviet radio transmissions. When the Russians saw this new plane coming straight towards them on their radars, it kept getting closer and closer, and they believed it to be a spy plane. Korean Airlines Flight 007 is approaching the city of Petropavlovsk on the Kamchatka Peninsula. For the Soviets, this region is key because of its location to the US, and contains valuable information and many military bases and airfields. Having a US spy plane fly right overhead could be a problem, and that's exactly what Korean Airlines Flight 007 did. The pilots of the Korean jet were completely unaware that they had just flown over the Soviet Union. The Soviets quickly sprang into action and scrambled jets into the air to take a good look at the plane. A Sukhoi Su-15 fighter plane piloted by Major Gennady Osipovich flies just behind the Korean plane. He radios back to the Soviet command. "I'm observing and locked onto the target." With it being the middle of the night, Osipovich cannot see that it is a civilian plane. The plane's livery is impossible to see at night, so he can't make out the Korean Airlines text or the blue cheat line that spans the entire fuselage. Osipovich gets closer. "I'm approaching the target, I'm getting closer, I can see the plane's strobe light." Passenger airliners have many different light systems. Strobe lights are flashing white lights usually located on the wings and tail fin. The 747 also comes with a red rotating beacon light on the top of the fuselage. This could have let the Soviets know that this was indeed a passenger plane. Flight 007 is now flying over the Sea of Okhotsk and is flying straight towards Sakhalin Island, another highly sensitive area of the Soviet Union. After passing over Sakhalin Island, Gennady Osipovich gets a real good look at the plane. He gets underneath the plane with a little bit of hope that the flight crew will actually see him before he has to fire a missile. At the time Gennady Osipovich gets closer to the plane, a tragic coincidence takes place. In the cockpit of the Korean plane, the crew discuss climbing to a higher altitude to save fuel. They radio a request to Tokyo Center to climb to flight level 350, or 35,000 feet. The request is granted and the crew begin climbing. To the Soviets, who think this is a military plane, this climbing maneuver makes it look like an evasive action. Osipovich is then given the command to destroy the target, and fires 2 air-to-air missiles at the passenger plane. It took about 15 seconds for the missiles to hit 007, but these missiles in particular actually detonated about 50 meters away from the plane. However, the shrapnel from inside the missile blasted holes into the fuselage, creating a rapid decompression as well as severing vital hydraulic lines. Without basic flight controls, the crew are helpless as the plane climbs from its loss of hydraulics. Naturally, the plane then dips before spiraling into the Sea of Japan, killing all 269 people on board. The plane came down about 4 to 5 miles away from Japan's Monoron Island. Soviet fighter pilot Major Gennady Osipovich heads home thinking he has shot down a US spy plane. As dawn breaks, it becomes clear that Flight 007 was shot down. The Soviet Union tried to cover it up by stating that the plane had to make a forced landing. However, when the news got round to the White House that the Soviet Union had shot down a passenger plane, they finally came clean. The United States President Ronald Reagan speaks to his people in solidarity with South Korea. South Korea have been a good ally with the US, and it also didn't help that 62 of the passengers were American. Tensions ran high as talks about nuclear disarmament were cancelled. It became a wild goose chase to find the flight recorders, which the Soviets got to first, and it wasn't until the eventual collapse of the USSR that we found out exactly what had happened that night. As of Major Gennady Osipovich, he still believes to this day that he shot down a US military plane.